For tomorrow's action. We will hear from amazing speakers, Lara, Lesley, Linda, all pals. Unfortunately, our fourth speaker could not make it. There were cancellation of flights. It's been the craziest weekend. We did not know it was going to be that crazy. Lara traveled the whole day to get over here and to show with them. So Lesley was delayed. I don't know, Linda, how did
I'm all right.
you're good? Okay. You're good. So we will start, is Reverend Hagler, we will start by a special welcome by Reverend Hagler, and we will continue our time here together.
Woo!
It's good to have you here, and we have been blessed by your presence and the presence of people who were here at our worship service this morning as we have gathered in around this issue of really countering Christian Zionism and trying to speak some real truths, rational truth in the midst of the world. One of the scriptures that was up before us today was about people being sent out 2 by 2 in a group of 7. And I reminded people that if you look at the text, you understand that folks understood that they were on a clandestine mission. Right? That's why they were told to take nothing with them on the road, don't greet anybody on the road. When you get to the house, share the password. If the password comes back to you, then it's okay to go into that house, but stay in that house. Don't move from house to house, but to organize the communities in which the resistance to the occupation was going to take place. And that's what was going on in the text. And you begin to look at the text and realize that our work is really a work of correcting that which is wrong. And that is always a threat to folks who think that they're in power. But this is like Reverend Kenneth King lifted up today, and the singers lifted up from New Hope Baptist United Church of Christ, the spirit of hope and hopefulness, because that's sometimes we forget, is that as long as we continue to keep on keeping on and doing what we're called to do, and standing up for what is right in the midst of voices that always try to shout us down. But we dare to stand up anyway, Ariel, and we dare to stand up anyway and do what we're called to do, because we know it's the right thing to do, because we know that what we do is rooted in a great universal love. Therefore, the fact is that we may have to go on a long time, but the fact is that we have the power to go on a long time until victory is won, until justice is seen, until love manifests itself in our world, and people can truly exist as brothers and sisters. That's why I continue to do what I'm called to do. And that's why you continue to do what I want to welcome you to the Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ. This church was founded in 1881. It was founded, its original building was at 17th and P Street Northwest, which is right outside of DuPont Circle. And that was one of the hearts of the black community in those days. And so you can see when you go down there, you don't see much presence of a black community down 17th and P Northwest. And so in a sense, we've been pushed and pushed, and that's been the whole issue around gentrification, which is another issue around displacement of poor folks, of people of color, and to take over the city and only make the city a place for opulent wealth. And that's what part of what Plymouth is engaged right now is in terms of resisting the displacement here in Washington, D.C., but also the resistance to displacement around the world. Because one thing that we are trained to think, we want to think that our struggle is unique, and our issues are unique. And somehow the things that we're battling against are not universal. Well, they are. White supremacy is cut out of the same cloth. The agenda that happened here in terms of enslaving people is the same kind of colonial settler agenda that happens around the world, and particularly in places like Palestine. What we should be seeing and not understanding what we should be understanding. I know this, is that my struggle is a universal struggle. My struggle against racism is a universal struggle. My struggle against white supremacy is a universal struggle. It doesn't stop at this border, but it goes into places wherever people are struggling to be free, and we have to dare to stand in solidarity and commitment with others, because we know one thing: if folk win over there, they're going to eventually win here, and I can't afford to allow them to win over there, because I can't afford to allow them to win here. That's what it's about. Standing up for justice, standing up for peace, standing up in solidarity with one another. We're called to be Palestinians, and we're called to be black, and we're called to be any and everybody who's oppressed in this world. We need to say that is who I am, and that's where I stand, and I can stand no other place. God bless you. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, amen. And thank you to all who are participating in today's panel. Thank you to the Fosna volunteers. Thank you to the Fosna staff. And thank you to everybody who's part of this action. We will have a land acknowledgement by Daniel, who will come up and do that.
Thanks, Tarek. So I want to name that we are on occupied Piscataway land. occupied, the Piscataway people experienced violence and displacement by white Christians to force them out. And that has not been made right yet. We're also here in what is Chocolate City, which has been a home to Black communities for years and years and years, and is also experiencing displacement and violence, again, from white people who are coming in and saying, this is ours now. And so we are here to name and acknowledge that colonization is not Christianity, that Palestinian liberation theology, Black liberation theology is Christianity, and that Christian Zionism is the aberration. Christian Zionism is the different strand. It is not the strand that we're following. So I name and acknowledge this is a place that is sacred to a lot of communities. This is a place that has a long history of violence and struggle and resistance. And we're here to honor the struggle of those who have come before us and to leave an inspiration for those who come after us to keep on resisting colonization and white supremacy.
Just to say a couple logistics. If there are disruptions, will not be tolerated if there are any. We do have a de-escalation team if that were to happen. So we will announce a couple of things. One, we would ask you to leave the space, please. And then second, the de-escalation team would take it from there just in case there are any disruptions. And just so we are all clear on how we're going to deal with this. We will continue with a briefing on Christian Zionism by Stephen Gardner. And Stephen is Program Area Lead for the Racial Immigrant Justice Team at Political Research Associates, where he specializes in work opposing white nationalism, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia. He has a doctorate in cultural anthropology from Cornell University, specializing in cultures of resistance to militarism and militarization. He will soon be releasing a new report on Christian Zionism. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you, Tarek. And first, I just want to say how grateful I am to be here and to see all of you here in this space, in solidarity, in opposition to what CUFI represents and what needs doing in this world. So, my briefing here, what is Christian Zionism and why should we care? First, what makes Christian Zionists is a politics driven by belief in the prophetic necessity of the modern state of Israel. Specifically, they believe that in end times, that they both desire and many believe is imminent, could come by 2050, that requires an expanded version of Israel and the quote-unquote return of Jews to Israel from all over the world. They are conscious of the fact that the vision that they have is not going to happen without violence. In fact, they view it as part of their prophetic endowment that what is going to happen will happen by violence. In fact, that they anticipate before the return of Jesus the killing of a third to three-quarters of the population of the world. So that's the background against which we have to think about this work. So to get more specific, I want to take you back to 2005. In that year, Pastor John Hagee, founder and chair of CUFI, Christians United for Israel, the most powerful Christian Zionist organization in the United States, preached one of his most controversial, by controversial I mean bigoted, sermons. In that sermon, Hagee refers to Adolf Hitler as God's agent sent to terrorize the Jews of Europe into returning, quote unquote, to Israel. This is a quote. Then God sent a hunter. I won't do his voice. Then God sent a hunter. A hunter is someone who comes with a gun and he forces you. Hitler was a hunter. By the way, if you get to see the video of this, he actually mimics carrying a gun around while he does it. Now, Hagee's not the only Christian Zionist leader who talks about Hitler in these kinds of terms. In fact, many of the leaders in the movement are obsessed with the Holocaust and they can seem to hardly contain their excitement when they imagine persecution of the Jews by the Antichrist. They will, quoting Hagee again, he will, this presumed figure, make Hitler look like a firework. That's his analogy. Also, this hunter language is common amongst Christian Zionists. They appropriate it from the book of Jeremiah, which any reputable scholar will tell you is all about the Babylonian captivity and return, and that Hitler, in fact, is not mentioned anywhere in the book of Jeremiah. But you wouldn't know that from listening to some of these guys preach. So anyway, Hagee says Hitler's a hunter, okay. And he says, quote, that will be offensive to some people. Yeah. Quote, well, dear heart, be offended, I didn't write it, Jeremiah wrote it. Not so much. Again, no Hitler in Jeremiah. Plus, anyone who's a scholar of that book also knows that Jeremiah didn't actually write for himself, he had a scribe. So as previously mentioned, okay, all right, anyway, he goes on. It was the truth, this is Hagee again, it was the truth, and it is the truth. How did it happen? Because God allowed it to happen. Why did it happen? Because God said, my top priority for the Jewish people is to get them to come back to the land of Israel. Okay, so that first part, God allowed it to happen. This is a pretty standard reference to the concept of theodicy. The idea if there is an all-powerful, all-knowing God, then anything that happens by definition, God allowed to happen. It's not something that we really need to spend a lot of time on here. But that second bit, it's something different. The part where Hagee is telling us that he knows by reading the book of Jeremiah that no reputable scholar thinks is about Hitler or the end of the world. He thinks he knows the mind of God well enough to interpret that in such a way that he can tell us what's going to happen in the future. For most believers who are not Christian Zionists, this falls somewhere between hubris and heresy, especially when the consequences of the interpretation are the prediction of the annihilation of most of the people living on earth. But anyway, so he says, why? Because of his essential belief in the, why is it acceptable to Hagee? Because of his belief in the crucial prophetic importance of the modern state of Israel in bringing about the end times and the second coming of Jesus. So for Christian Zionists, this is not just a good thing. It's the best thing, the most important, the most desirable thing still to happen in the whole prophetically given calendar of God's great plan for the universe. It is something, in short, that every quote-unquote good Christian should not only recognize and celebrate, but help to hasten along to its blood-stained conclusion. That's for Christians. What about for Jews? Well, same sermon, Hagee comes along and says, well, it's nice that the Jews are back in the land, and this means that they are now physically alive, but they're not spiritually alive. Physically alive, not spiritually alive. What does that mean? Are they dead? All Jews, everywhere, in the United States, in Israel, wherever they are in the world? Is that anti-Semitism? Pretty much by definition. Okay? But it's not just your garden variety anti-Semitism. It's not just obnoxious stereotypes about brash manners and hard dealing. It is what some observers have started to call spiritual racism. And I'll say a bit more about that, what I mean by that in a minute. But first I want to sort of segue a little and talk about the tactical point here. Because you're not going to find statements about the dead souls of Jews and the objectification of Jews as cogs in Gentiles' machine in CUFI literature. You're not going to find it there. Be careful. Should you be reassured? Well, where I come from, if one day you put on a hat that says CUFI that claims your support for Israel has, quote, absolutely nothing to do with end times prophecy, and then the next day you put on a hat that says John Hagee Ministries, and you write books and preach sermons about the cosmic importance of Israel as God's prophetic clock, quote unquote, and a coming forth Christ that will serve to drive Jews back to Israel, there's not much to be reassured about. Circling back to that spiritual racism thing, what do I mean? Well, something more than sort of a religious belief that salvation is through Jesus. This is a fairly common Christian belief. It's sort of spiritual categories that are essentialized and quasi-permanent. It flows from the extremes of third-wave charismatic thought, which has had heavy influence on lots of prominent Christian Zionists, and creates essentialized categories of human beings based on their spiritual value. Not their value, not what they believe, but on their intrinsic value. It is a movement that has reversed the process by which anti-Jewish bigotry was secularized in the 19th century, turned into racism, and the very term anti-Semitism was created by German racists whose political project was to essentialize Jewish otherness, converting it into a genetic flaw that could never be cured by conversion. The third wave charismatics who believe in this sort of spiritual racism idea, or who believe in what I'm calling spiritual racism, what they see is that conversion is possible for Jews, for Muslims, for others in the world, non-believers, for Catholics who don't believe correctly in Christian Zionist belief. It is possible for them to convert, but the fact that they have not yet been converted it's an indication in almost like a sort of predestinational sense, not just of future damnation, but evidence of current metaphysical deficiency. They lack the right stuff. They actually use the phrase spiritual DNA. They may still be saved, these people who are lacking the correct spiritual DNA, through the efforts, through the sort of the supernatural efforts of contemporary apostles and prophets whom this movement pushes forward, or through the direct intervention of Jesus. But their essence is still somehow pitiable. Do all Christian Zionists believe this? No. But those who do are increasingly influential. Indeed, for our purposes, we can limit the label Christian Zionists to political activists who either see Jews and Israel through the lens of end times prophecy and see themselves as working in support of such prophecies, or those who believe that their support for Israel will yield supernatural powers that will help them to win dominion over all aspects of their own society. And both of those views are out there in large numbers in the millions. And both views, and they're not mutually exclusive, instrumentalize Jewish existence. Both views make Jews into cogs in Christian hopes of domination, salvation, and rapture. Both views are intrinsically anti-Semitic, and both lend themselves to religious bigotry of all sorts, but particularly to Islamophobia. Putting CUFI in a little context, so where does this put CUFI fit in the bigger picture of Christian Zionism? Are they a moderate voice in a more extreme landscape? No. CUFI, for the most part, avoids the theological discussions because they reveal too much. They don't talk about this stuff. They just assume that the people who sign up for their alerts believe this already. But their policy advocacy clarifies what they are fighting for. At the behest of CUFI, members sent 135,000 emails to the Trump administration, a soft target in any case, demanding he fulfill his promise to relocate the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. Now, White House insiders like Mike Pence and Mike Pompeo are themselves Christian Zionists. What the CUFI emails do is they give them the political power that says, Mr. Trump, these are your base. Moreover, that movement of the embassy, this is not just some symbolic gesture. This is an effort to consolidate the plan for Christian Zionists, what they see as a necessary plan to reconstruct the temple, on the Temple Mount, at the site of the Dome of the Rock, the third holiest site in Islam. So it's fully consistent with the prophetically driven goals of the apocalypse mongers. So what CUFI's lobbying is not consistent with is any hope for justice or peace in Palestine, Israel, and in this context, John Hagee's views about Muslims more generally, shared by Christian Zionists as I am defining them, are relevant to the understanding of what drives the organization he founded and continues to lead. Christian Zionists see Palestinians, not all of whom, of course, are Muslims, but they see all of them as being in the way of Israel consolidating upholding power in the quote-unquote promised land. They ignore the colonial white supremacy that shaped the founding of Israel, one chapter in European conquest and domination, not just because of the doomsday prophecies, of course, but because they generally see nothing amiss in any of the other chapters of white supremacy. Even as native peoples were seen as obstacles to the spread of, quote, civilization in the Americas, Christian Zionists see Arabs as obstacles to Israel's expansion into parts of contemporary Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, as they believe Scripture guarantees, and to the reconstruction of the temple on the side of the Dome of the Rock. In other words, rather than simply being friends of Israel, Christian Zionists are eager to support the most aggressive, expansive, and racist version of Israel. I would call them enemies of Israel. Because that is what conforms with their version of what must be, not surprising, where Jews are instrumentalized, Muslims are imagined as the enemy. This extends beyond the Middle East. John Hagee sees Muslims generally as the enemy. Of the 3.1 million Muslims living in the U.S. right now, Hagee has written, America has been invaded by an invisible army of millions who intend to destroy this nation. They aren't coming to America, they're already here. This army of radical Islamic extremists has poured across our open borders and are waiting patiently for the hour of their unified attack designed to bring chaos and governmental collapse. This is from 2014, by the way, so this is before Trump. Hagee goes there long before Trump. So if Christian Zionism, as I defined it, is both anti-Semitic and Islamophobic, and if it fosters a politics of war and injustice, as I argue it does, the question remains, how should we, as allies of justice and liberation, interact with Christian Zionists? Often our first impulse is toward dialogue, driven by the humane desire to connect and nourish the good in everyone. On an individual level, I think that's okay. When it's you or me interacting one-on-one with a friend, relative, or neighbor, okay, go ahead. But Christian Zionism is a political movement. As such, it must be opposed politically, working in the first and last instance in a position of solidarity with the most vulnerable. Reconciliation with CUFI can't come at the expense of rejecting or distancing ourselves from kids in cages, whether in Israel or Arizona. Woo! Christian Zionism is not an isolated movement. It's part of the bigger Christian right. It is part of the larger campaign to undermine reproductive choice, oppose LGBTQ rights, demonize border crossers, and subvert democracy. Christian Zionists, like others on the far right, may clamor for free speech, but this is little more than window dressing. Free speech is often only free for the privileged, but criminalization turns peaceful protest into prison sentences, not just in the case of BDS, but for those protesting encroachment on native lands, barbaric incarceration practices, or the bodily autonomy of women. We must not dehumanize our opponents, but we must not lose track of the fact that they see us as enemies. Misguided they may be, but those of us who have privilege must not squander it in efforts to reconcile ourselves with unreason and injustice. Safety is often elusive. For many, it is unavailable. But what safety can be had, we must seek in solidarity and in a conscious political action. This means through teaching, preaching, advocacy, voting and running for office, lobbying, media, social, and legacy. And when needs be, taking to the streets, sitting in, walking out, striking, and refusing to compromise with those who imagine that their future paradise is predicated on genocide and theocracy. Safety and solidarity, thank you so much for letting me.
Thanks for framing the theological for us. And what's wonderful about being an MC without a schedule in your hands is that I can change it up here as I want. So I will tell you next, we will move into our panel, and then we will go into a reflection that I'll give for 5 minutes. And during that, we'll do some chanting, and then into wrapping up. Sounds good? You sure you're just saying that you have no other option, right? All right. So today we will listen to the stories and leadership of women who have fought the male-dominant, Christian-dominant, white supremacist systems and have won. We listen to them from a multi-faith and from a progressive lens that has been activated into action. And that's the space we go into now. Our first speaker is Lesley. Lesley Williams is a member of the Coordinating Committee for Jewish Voice for Peace in Chicago, organizing to address Islamophobia. Lesley participated in 2 West Bank delegations with the Center for Jewish Nonviolence for Solidarity Work, and is a member of the Center for Jewish Nonviolence's Strategy and Values team. She is a featured speaker for Jews Against Anti-Muslim Racism, and recently published the article, "We Cannot Fight Anti-Semitism and Anti-Black Racism in Isolation." Let us welcome Lesley.
So thank you, everybody. Thank you to Tarek for saying that we have won against white supremacy and sexism. I would say I believe we will win, but I think we have a lot more fighting to keep doing. A couple of years ago, I approached a good friend of mine, a local black pastor who's noted for his fiery sermons condemning racial injustice. I was hoping he would support JVP's Deadly Change campaign, which highlights Israel's racist, militarized training tours for U.S. police. I was also hoping he would discourage his congregants and fellow pastors from going on CUFI-sponsored tours of Israel. The Reverend sighed, and although he acknowledged the moral problems inherent in such tours, he did not want to risk his strong friendships with several local rabbis. And he feared that nothing he would say would stop his parishioners and colleagues from accepting a free trip to Israel. "You have to understand," he said, "going to the Holy Land, worshiping in Jerusalem or at the Red Sea or the Church of the Nativity, that's a lifelong dream for many Christians. There's nothing I can say that would make them give up a chance of walking in the footsteps of their Savior." My suggestion, which he did not take, was to ask why standing on the rocks where Jesus stood was more important than standing for the values for which he lived.
Oh, yeah.
This is my question for Jewish and Christian Zionists, especially for Black Zionists. As an African American who converted to Judaism largely because of its ethical values and because of the great liberation narrative embodied in Exodus, it's hard to understand how anyone moved by that narrative can accept Zionism, a political philosophy of ethnic domination camouflaged in religious trappings. Zionism has always been based in fear, a desire for separateness, and an insular distrust of the modern world. It goes hand in hand with racism because it privileges a single group as chosen, special, with unique rights. It insists that the only solution to ethnic oppression is ethnic isolation. It has relied on the racialization of both Jews and Muslims and has used faulty biblical criticism to suggest that they are eternal enemies. It exploits anti-Semitism and nostalgia into a deification of land to justify ethnic cleansing. Theodor Herzl, a secular Jewish Austrian, created modern political Zionism out of a patchwork of religious prophecies and realpolitik in open collaboration with European anti-Semites. Unlike Christian Zionism, which always focused exclusively on the land of ancient Israel, Herzl's conception of a Jewish state was not originally linked to Palestine. In fact, he considered locations as diverse as Uganda and Argentina for his Jewish homeland. But political Zionism was always fundamentally European. In his 1896 pamphlet on the Jewish state, Herzl wrote, "Jews in Palestine will form a portion of a rampart of Europe against Asia, an outpost of civilization opposed to barbarism." Israel's founders frequently expressed racism towards Africans, Arabs, and even Jews from the Middle East, calling North African Jews savage-looking, and stating, "The primitiveness of these people is unsurpassable. As a rule, they are only slightly more advanced than the Arabs and Negroes. It is not surprising that the crime rate in the country is rising given their chronic laziness and hatred for any kind of work." Is it any surprise that apartheid South Africa was for years one of Israel's most loyal allies, with white South African leaders noting that, like Israel, they were an island of civility surrounded by a dark, hostile jungle? Given this history, why do so many Africans and African Americans support Zionism? Well, the appeal of a safe, separate enclave has resonance in the African diaspora as it does in the Jewish one. The story of the Israelites' emancipation from bondage and journey to the Promised Land inspired Black nationalists like Marcus Garvey. Robin Kelly notes that Black Zionism provided not only a narrative of slavery, emancipation, and renewal, but a language to critique America's racist state, with biblical Israel representing a new beginning. Black Zionism, the idea that Black Americans did not belong in America, but were mystically connected to their African homeland, led to the US-led settler colonial project in Liberia. This concept of a divinely ordained connection to a mythic homeland is key to justifying Zionism. It's why many religious Zionists refer to the West Bank as the sacred lands of Judea and Samaria, why both Christian and Jewish Zionism attempt to erase Palestinian claims to Jerusalem. If it's mine, it can't ever have been yours. But this claim to a covenant is also a way for the marginalized to feel that they have a place in the divine plan. It's not surprising that many Jews of color, marginalized within conventional Judaism, cling so strongly to a Zionist ideal, which assures them a place in the Promised Land. Similarly, marginalized African and Arab Jews in Israel lay claim to their Jewishness through their unswerving support of Zionism. Yet these have not been the only models that people of color have used to engage with Israel. In the 1960s, American Black nationalists took up the Palestinian cause as part of an inclusive, global struggle for liberation. In his book, Black Power in Palestine, Michael Fishbach reminds us that famous Black activists like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Jesse Jackson visited parts of Arab Palestine and issued pronouncements on the Arab-Israeli conflict. The Black Panther Party, ministers from various denominations, Black congressmen, even Muhammad Ali, all visited the Middle East during that tumultuous period, where they met with Palestinians from all walks of life, including Yasser Arafat. Important Black political conferences issued statements on Israel and the Palestinians, and men and women of the arts and letters, like those in the Black arts movement, highlighted Israel and the Palestinians in their writings. Poet June Jordan was a powerful witness for Palestine, connecting Black and Palestinian liberation. I was born a Black woman, and now I am become a Palestinian, against the relentless laughter of evil. Mizrahi activists in Israel took inspiration from the Panthers, forming their own revolutionary Black Panther Party for Arab Jewish rights. Black and brown anti-Zionism has stood for global solidarity and struggle, whereas it's hardly surprising that many religious Zionists of all races are socially conservative and authoritarian. In an anti-Semitic tweet about George Soros, Dumasani Washington, the diversity outreach director of CUFI, cites as his enemies not just anti-Zionists, but feminists, and complains that Disney's Little Mermaid teaches children to disobey their parents. Reverend John Hagee, who Steve mentioned, spoke at the dedication of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem and believes that the Katrina floods were God's punishment for homosexuality, that abortion will do millions to hell in the end times, and that Harry Potter and rock music are gateways to the devil. Zionism presumes to tell Black people what they should think and who they should ally with. It sets up a good Black, bad Black binary, similar to the good Muslim, Black Muslim narrative, where Zionists decide which people of color are worthy of their notice, based solely on their attitude towards Israel as opposed to human rights. Thus you have the Anti-Defamation League scolding Black leaders who support Palestine, telling Black athlete Reggie Bush that he should stick to what he knows, football, that the Black Lives Matter movement should keep their eyes on the prize. You have ostensible civil rights organizations attacking civil rights icons like Desmond Tutu, Angela Davis, and Michelle Alexander, the moment they express a scintilla of support for Palestinian human rights. Zionism claims to be global, but it is only in solidarity with other Jews, primarily European Jews. It borrows the mantle of religious Zionism, yet is tribal and ethnic in nature. Otherwise, why not encourage Palestinians to convert to Judaism? To work, Zionism has to demonize and dehumanize an entire population, deny their existence, their uniqueness. We see the constant refusal to acknowledge Palestinians as Palestinians, but rather to conflate them with Arabs, and to excuse any crimes against them as justification for generic Arab offenses. For example, Chloe Barderi, the poster child for Black Christian Zionism, justifies the seizure of Palestinian property as recompense for Arab enslavement of Africans. Zionism works hand in hand with anti-Semitism because it relies on fear, on the conviction of an ever-present existential threat. Zionism even works directly with known anti-Semites, especially Christian Zionist anti-Semites. Our friend Pastor Hagee famously stated that the Antichrist will be partially Jewish and homosexual, and as Steve mentioned, has claimed that Adolf Hitler was a half-breed Jew sent by God to persecute Europe's Jews. He also says that the Holocaust was God's retribution for Jewish anti-Zionists who did not follow Herzl. So, what is our way forward? We must not accept the good Jew, good Muslim, good black, bad black binary. We must not accept interfaith dialogue which papers over our divisions and silences our calls for justice for the vulnerable. BDS co-founder Omar Barghouti stated that the Black freedom movement in the U.S. is uniquely positioned to play a key and leading role in bringing together this coalition of the oppressed across the globe. Yet, it is not for us, for any Jewish, Christian, or Muslim organization, to tell people of color who to support or what to believe. As we join forces in the fight for Palestinian human rights, we must avoid that paternalism and tokenism we critique in our opponents. So I would simply ask my black and brown siblings, what is your vision of the blessed community? Is it one that balkanizes humanity by race, religion, gender, and sexuality, or an inclusive vision which uplifts all God's children? Does your view of the promised land rest on fear and isolation and rigid hierarchies of oppression? Or is it a land where all God's children are created equal? Will you seek only to walk in the footsteps and on the rocky pathways your Savior and your prophets trod? Or will you seek the spiritual pathways of justice and compassion they called us to follow?
Oh, yeah.
Our vision, our path is not the idolatry of Zionism, but a Judaism beyond Zionism, a Judaism of tikkun olam, repairing the world. And I hope you will all walk that path with me. Thank you.
Next, we have Sarsour. She is a Palestinian Muslim American organizer from Brooklyn, New York, and co-founder of the first Muslim online organizing platform, Empower Change. Linda co-chaired the Women's March on Washington and the March to Justice, a 250-mile journey on foot to deliver a justice package to end racial profiling, demilitarize police, and demand the government invest in young people and communities. Linda has been at the forefront of major civil rights campaigns, including calling for an end to unwarranted surveillance of New York's Muslim communities and ending police brutality. Let us welcome Linda.
Good evening, everyone. From my own tradition, Assalamu alaikum, may peace and blessings be upon you all. I'm so deeply honored and humbled to be here. I'm actually really quite moved to be in this space with all of you. I just feel God in this space. I feel love and compassion. I feel like I am in that beloved community that you speak of. I look around, I see people that look different. I see young people. I see more seasoned people. I see women and men and folks of all different gender backgrounds. I just feel really humbled that I'm so blessed to be in this space and this church. You moved me. I felt God through your voice as well. So thank you so much for having me here today. Thank you, Tarek, and the folks at Friends of Sabine and all the organizations that are involved in this action. Many of you know me very well. If I could get arrested every day, I would. I wanted to put me away. We just got to do something bold at this moment. The pathway is getting narrower. Our chances are getting slimmer, and our country is going down a really bad path. And not to say, and we will acknowledge in this room that, and we can all argue that the founding of this nation already in itself started on a bad path. And I remember being in Tennessee just last year for the commemoration of the assassination and martyrdom of Dr. Martin Luther King, the 50th anniversary. And Dr. Bernice King, Dr. Martin Luther King's daughter, told a story that the Sunday after Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated, he was going to give a sermon. And of course, he never got to give that sermon. And she said that he had called his mother and told her about the sermon that he was going to give. And he said that he was going to title the sermon, "America May Go to Hell." And he never got to give that sermon. And I think about that often, and her voice comes to me, and I think to myself, if he were alive 50 years later today, would he say that America already went to hell? that we have a responsibility. And that all of us are going to meet our Lord.
Oh, yeah.
And the Lord's going to ask us, where were you when you saw young children being caged at the border? Where were you when America's prisons were full of young black and brown people? Where were you when people were afraid to pick up their children from school or even go to work because they were just undocumented? Because somebody decided that the value of life goes with a piece of paper that they're supposed to have. And so when I think about the Palestinian cause, it's not just because I am Palestinian. And I have a responsibility to my heritage and to my ancestors and to my parents and grandparents and great-great-grandparents who sacrificed for me to even be here today at Plymouth Church and stand here on this platform. It's also our modern-day social justice cause. And I will tell you that decades ago, we were having the same conversation in our country about South African apartheid. People said, that's not your issue, that's not your cause. Anyone who was trying to end South African apartheid, you were all radical, you were communist, you were all kinds of things. And people were steadfast. They remained strong and focused. They engaged in boycotts and divestment. And what ended up happening is we were able to semi-end South African apartheid, because we can go to South Africa and talk to the folks down there and they'll tell you, listen, it's not 100% straight out here, but it's definitely better than it was a couple of decades ago. And so I stand here before you unapologetically Palestinian American. I am my great-great-grandmother's wildest dream manifested, standing in America, on America's largest platform, being able to declare my identity, my nationality, and who I am. Just because someone else decided to displace my family, just because they decided to steal our land from us, it doesn't mean that we still don't exist and that we don't still breathe life and joy and that we deserve to exist, just like everybody else. Believe it or not, we can sit here and talk about Christians United for Israel for a really long time, but I'm actually really grateful and glad they exist. Because we needed a group like them for a long time, one that was visible in their ideology, right? It was kind of always, we had to do too much explaining. All of a sudden, you got a group like CUFI hanging out with Donald Trump and all the white supremacists, and I'm like, see, those are folks are for, pro-Israel, those are the Christian Zionists hanging out with Trump. You tell me what side you want to be on. So now the sides became really clear. So now you have a moment in our country where, particularly in the progressive movement, because here's what happens in spaces like this. We spend so much time talking about right-wing Zionists, white supremacists, and what I believe is to be clear opposition. Those people don't share our values. But we don't spend enough time talking about those who perceive themselves to be part of our movement, who on this particular issue all of a sudden become really confused. So that's the folks that I want to talk about. And you can help me, because maybe you have answers to these questions. I'm still confused. How can you stand with us shoulder to shoulder in a movement and tell me that you are against white supremacy, that you are against ideology that says some people are better than others or more worthy than others based on the color of their skin or maybe the faith that they follow or whatever other characteristic? But then you support a state that believes in another form of supremacy, that says because we are Palestinian or because we are black Jews that we somehow become second and third and fourth class citizens. How does that work? How does that work? How does that make sense? How does saying, oh, we would have been against South African apartheid, but we don't know, Linda, don't use apartheid to describe what's happening in Israel. How is that not apartheid? That is the exact clear definition of apartheid. And if it wasn't clear to everybody, then they went and passed these nation-state laws because they wanted to make sure you weren't confused. It was definitely apartheid. So they codified it into the law. And then progressives were like, oh man, what do we do now? Now it's codified in the law, so we can't really sit here and defend it and say it's not apartheid. Well, it is apartheid. It's always been apartheid. If they have to codify it into law for everybody else to join us in saying it's apartheid, well then, good for them that they did all that. Because for the Palestinians and the black Jews and other people of color and other minorities that lived there, they were already experiencing second and third class citizenship with or without nation state laws. Yeah. So here's where the dilemma comes in. I gotta be sure in the movements that I'm in who my friends are.
Oh yeah.
I also gotta understand when we say we believe in God, and I truly, deeply in my heart believe that Christians and Muslims and Jews, that we are all of the Abrahamic faith, that we all believe in the same God. And I always tell Christians this: you don't need to stop me in the street and tell me that Jesus loves me, because I know that he loves me. I know. And I love him too. I'm not exactly here, because that always happens. And they get really excited when I say, I know he loves me and I love him too. And actually, you just caught me in the middle of a big controversy, because you know me, I'm controversial, I'm always in a controversy. And the controversy that I'm in is basically on Twitter about how Jesus, right? First of all, Jesus is not white. I mean, that shouldn't be a controversy, but apparently it is. And so I wanted to, say, listen, let's just be clear. If you are Christian, follow a faith of a man of a prophet, who was, for me, a Palestinian Jewish socialist. He was a man, when he went to look for Jesus, he wasn't looking for the powerful people. He wasn't doing the photo ops. He was with the most marginalized people, the poorest people, the most discarded people of his society. Wait until some of the white supremacists and Christian evangelical Zionists find out he didn't speak English. I didn't tell him that. I didn't even know that. That would have been just a lot. And so, exactly, tell that to them, because, Ariel, who's Little Mermaid, is also, so, you already know the controversy about that. I mean, priorities. But I think it's important for us in this moment. I just want to, wrap up by saying this, that the cause for justice for Palestinians has always been a cause for a really long time. Even Nelson Mandela himself said there is no freedom, or our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinian people. And that really tells me a lot about your character, about the faith that you follow, and the way in which you follow it, if you are able to say that one group of people deserves justice over another. Everybody deserves justice.
Oh, yeah.
God created all people. God doesn't like to see his creation harmed. He doesn't like to see his creation in pain. And in fact, we as Muslims believe that God tests us. Everything is a test for us as Muslims. And for me, my test is, as an American, as a Muslim in this country, what am I doing to stand up for justice? And also, as a person of faith, who are you afraid of? Because I'm only afraid of God. And all I do is to please God. I don't please man and woman and anybody else. And so in the movement that we are in, what we're looking for is that moral courage and moral clarity that is found in all of our faiths together. So, for me, I'm not intimidated. I'm actually, believe it or not, I'm staying with these people. I saw them today. They know exactly who I am. And what I hope that you get from here is stay bold, stay strong, and stay consistent. There was an abolitionist named Harriet Beecher Stowe. And she said, when you get into a tight place and everything goes against you till it seems as though you could not hang on a minute longer, never give up then. For that is just the place and time that the tide will turn. And I believe wholeheartedly that is the exact place that I'm in, that you're in, that we are in as a nation. It feels hard, it feels tight, you're almost feeling hopeless, you don't know, do you go here, do we just put our hands up and surrender? No. This is it. This is the moment. These folks, it's not just about Palestine. These are the same folks that are supporting an administration that is fascist, that is anti-immigrant, that is anti-black, that is anti-LGBTQ, that's anti-brown people all over the world. They're anti-health care for all people. They're anti-quality public education for all people. They're anti-everything that we all stand for in this room. And so what I always tell people, remind people that sometimes we think we're outnumbered. We're not outnumbered. We're just out organized. So all you gotta do is we gotta stop complaining about the opposition and just out organize it. I don't care what the opposition is. I don't even sit and reminisce about what the opposition is doing. I just figure out how to wake up tomorrow and work harder than the day I did yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
And that's it. And so what I want all of you to commit to in this room is to be in service of the most marginalized people. That those people are at the center of everything that you do. Not your comfort, not what makes you feel good, but about alleviating even just a little pain and suffering of the most marginalized people in this world. And remembering, put that American exceptionalism to the side. It's not about you and being in America or being an American. We are intrinsically connected to everybody across the world.
Yeah.
So when somebody tells me, why Palestine? Why do you bring Palestine into the movements? I say, why not? Why not Palestine? Why not the people of Somalia? Why not the people of Afghanistan or Mexico or Guatemala or Honduras or everybody all over the world? We stand up for all people. The people of Palestine are teachers. They have lived under the longest standing military occupation in modern history. And they still stand. And they are still resilient. And they're patient. And they have joy. And they have children. And they get married. And they still go on with their lives every single day. And that is who the Palestinian people are. That is the lineage and the blood that runs through my veins. So you don't ever have to worry about me. I don't care what anybody out here got to say to me. Because there is nothing that I'm experiencing here that is even close to the brutal military occupation and dehumanization of the Palestinian people every single day with your taxpayer dollars. So I said earlier that we're all going to meet our Lord one day. We all work hard for our money. I hustle for my money. I got kids in college. I got bills to pay. I got laundry to do just like everybody else here. Got rent to pay in New York City. And I think it is about damn time that we stand up and say, with our taxpayer dollars, we demand our taxpayer dollars go to quality education. When they ask me how to pay for Medicare for all, I say slash military aid to Israel, bring it back to schools in Chicago, bring it back to our hospitals, give it to our veterans who are homeless on these streets, give it back to our communities, invest in affordable housing, and allow people in our country to live with dignity so that we can offer that dignity to people all over the world. I'm blessed to be in this space with all of you. I am proud to be in space with all of you. I am proud to follow your God. I am proud to be a creation of the Almighty, most forgiving, most compassionate Lord who loves every single human being inside and outside this room. And our God is so forgiving and compassionate, He even loves our opposition. And I hope one day they get to feel the true love of our Lord, so they can come back to where they are needed most, to serve the most marginalized and hurt and broken people in this world. Thank you.
We've got lots of musicians and people ready to sing, and we will go into some music. And just a couple of announcements before that. You guys ready? Okay, just making sure. Just a couple of announcements before that. Reverend Hagler wanted me folks to know that on the 21st, what day is it? Sunday. Today, what is the date? Okay, on the 21st, Jannat Amini, aka Jannat Jihad, will be here, along with Nico Pellet, right, you have mentioned, at 10 a.m. So all of you are welcome to come to Reverend Hagler's church for that. And also to recognize Reverend Delonte Golston and Lucy Murphy, if you would both stand up, as part of the Poor People's Campaign. And we will continue through worship, through music.
If you think of the Middle East in this modern time, you can't help but say the word Palestine. People there have lost their land, some have